I'm Wes Doss. I grew up in Northern California. I've called Arizona home since 1982. In 1984, I enlisted in the U.S. Army and started what would be overall between active and reserve, a 21-year career with the U.S. Army. A lot of people don't really realize, and the Army military itself is different all the time based on the needs of the country and the needs of the organization. You don't always get the job you want, and the job you want isn't always available. When I first raised my hand, I went into the infantry. The first couple of years I was just a straight leg grunt infantry soldier who re-enlisted to go into the military police corps because I wanted a career field that I thought would translate at some point in time into a civilian career field. I'd always had an interest in law enforcement. The training that I got was by and large the best criminal justice training I'd ever had. I mean, I've taught academies, I've been a part of a number of academies. The unfortunate side of it is that the Army has taken very little steps to have anything that they do certified outside of the Army. So a lot of people don't really recognize what takes place in the military. And so while it was good experience, it didn't really translate into anything. Fortunately, my last 4 years of active duty, I finished out my associate's degree, and I went into what at the time was called the CID apprentice program. And CID at the time was a homogenous branch that was the senior criminal investigative organization that the Department of the Army had. It was kind of like the Army's version of the FBI. And we were told, your opportunities exist. You've got the opportunity to go to Scotland Yard, you've got the opportunity to go to the FBI Academy. There's duty assignments at all these locations. And unfortunately, I ended up getting involved in doing the Army's protective service work through the Protective Services Battalion based out of Fort Belvoir. And that's pretty much what I did the entire time. So I had constituents that I went to school with that certainly got those choice duty assignments. I got to go to shooting schools and other things and do protective work leading into the first Gulf War. During the first Gulf War, it was based on our details and who we were assigned to and our functions. Our offices were based out of Germany, and we would spend sporadic periods of time with either chiefs of staff or general officers in theater. When the Gulf War ended, I got reassigned to another duty location, and I'd been deployed from an overseas assignment. So my family, my wife and my daughter at the time, our first child, were stuck overseas. It was a typical snafu. And while it didn't last for very long, the separation didn't last very long, it created enough turmoil, created enough stress that we made a family decision, and I acquiesced, and I went ahead and ETS'd out of the Army. The funny part was when I processed out at the Presidio in San Francisco, which was cool. I mean, I'm from Northern California. I thought, wow, this is great. I get to go to the Presidio, check this place out. When we left the base, after we had finally processed out, we're on a bus with a bunch of other folks that had ETS'd out, and as soon as it cleared the gate of the Presidio, everybody was cheering. And I'm the one guy on the bus that started crying. For me, that separation was one of the most dramatic separations of my life. I mean, it was like a family member had died, and I didn't like it. And it was a rough adjustment. I found out that the world outside of the military was filled full of people that didn't say what they meant, didn't do what they said. It was just a different place. And even though my field that I was involved in had me more civilianized than other soldiers, it just I don't know, it was just strange. So my wife knew this, and again, she gave in to me and allowed me to go back into the National Guard. And I spent a number of years in the Arizona National Guard before an opening came about in a unit in Las Vegas. And I went from there to the Army Reserve, where I finished my time out, retiring out in 2006 through the Army Reserve. So immediately following the Gulf War, Desert Storm, when I got out, came back to Arizona. It's where you have roots at, and started applying to a number of law enforcement agencies all over the state, out of state, trying to see who was going to bite first. And ultimately, I was picked up by the county sheriff's department in the county where I reside, and went off to the academy. And at the time, we had a number of academies in the state, but this was the senior academy in Tucson, and it was a good experience. It was a resident academy. It was like being back in the military again. It was very regimented. We were in barracks. We have the typical details, whether it was cleaning or maintenance that we had to do, as well as our homework. It was almost like taking a step back in time. And I spent my time with the sheriff's department, concurrently while I was in the Army Reserve. And I filled a number of voids at the sheriff's office. I started out in patrol, as everybody does, and because of my experiences in the military, I elevated quickly out of patrol into our detective bureau, where I spent 7 years in detectives before promoting back out and going back to patrol. And in detectives, I had an opportunity to do a number of things. I mean, I worked everything. We had general investigations in our unit. Everybody had a specialty, but we all worked whatever came in the door. And we had a pretty heavy activity level. I carried anywhere from 19 to 20 cases at a time. So you were staying pretty busy. So I'm working everything from burglaries up to homicides. So it was interesting, good learning lesson. While I was doing that, I had peripheral duty as a firearms instructor and a defensive tactics instructor in my department. And I was also the training coordinator as well as the team leader for our tactical operations unit, which is what we refer to our SWAT team as. I started my company, Khyber, while I was still active with the sheriff's office as well as the Army Reserve, and it was fairly slow. It was, I'm typically the local guy doing firearms training, branching out a little bit to some neighboring jurisdictions. So I didn't put a lot of effort into it. It was mostly kind of a part-time function, like a hobby that we were just kind of bringing to light. When I retired, I got hired by the Sig Sauer Academy, and I drove a 1988 Ford Bronco with 35-inch tires and a 6-inch lift all the way from northern Arizona to Epping, New Hampshire. So about $1,000 in gas, and 4 days later, I'm at the SIG Academy. And that was my first real exposure to the private industry. Yeah, I mean, I'd been an NRA staff instructor for the law enforcement division for a while, but this was my first taste of pretty much the big leagues. And I learned a lot at SIG. It was a great learning opportunity. The problem is the lifestyle between where we live and New Hampshire is a little bit different. Where we live in Arizona, we're just quickly outside of the area of Las Vegas, Nevada, so it's a very hustling and bustling, high-speed kind of environment. And when I flew my wife out to Manchester, like in January or February, leaving the 80-degree temps in Las Vegas to the freezing temps in New Hampshire, she wasn't really thrilled. So I had a hard time getting her to consider moving to New Hampshire, and that ended up becoming a decision to come back to Arizona and put some energy back into Khyber. I took on some other roles. I've worked for a number of other companies in the course of putting Khyber back on its feet. We ran some contract programs for other companies, both stateside and overseas. And then eventually we got our legs underneath us and started to kick Khyber into high gear. While I was bringing my company back, I took on some peripheral duties in the commercial side of the house. I was working for Crimson Trace, where I was contracted for a number of years as the training director. I was then brought on at Brownells, and I helped stand up the law enforcement program at Brownells and the training programs at the range. And I've worked with a number of other manufacturers in a training or marketing capacity since then. Meanwhile, elevating my own company and getting more legs and underneath it and creating its own footprint. I guess it's fair to kind of give you the lowdown on Khyber. Khyber is a really specialized emergency response training and research company that we have traditionally catered to the law enforcement and military market, with a spattering on the commercial side, on the civilian side. We do a little bit more now than we have in the past. And we become known for the initiatives that we've created. Several years ago, we started a trade show function called the 1 Inch to 100 Yards Warrior Conference that was actually a pretty substantial training conference and trade show. In the last 5 years, we initiated an initiative called the Light Sights and Lasers U.S. Tour, which is truly a unique program. It is the only touring initiative that travels the country, providing cost-free training to law enforcement, military, and then trainers that are within that industry. It's sponsor driven, so we work with a number of manufacturers on this, but it's to address some of the shortcomings in training as well as some of the budget cuts in training, and to provide some folks with enhanced training that many of them don't generally have access to. And it's been a whirlwind trip, and it's been a success. It's been a lot of fun. We've reached several thousand students, and several thousand departments all across the country, from as far away as Alaska and Hawaii. So we've got a pretty good growing footprint in that capacity as well. You know, futures are always kind of speculative. It's to say what my future plans are always based around the trends of our industry. And training has become a pretty competitive field. As a guy with an advanced degree, and I have done a lot of teaching at that level, as well as what we do with our own company, I'm always taken back by sometimes the well intentions, but sometimes the lack of instructor capabilities. I mean, it's not that there's people that can't do it, it's that they haven't had the wherewithal given to them to do it. And I think what I'd like to start transitioning into are more instructor development programs to try and help make instructors better instructors. Not necessarily trying to create a group of minions or have people buy into my own doctrine. I mean, this is simply information that's based on tried and true techniques and tried and true philosophies to try and get people to take their career to heart a little bit more than they do. I mean, from my perspective, because we've been so intently focused on our professional side of the house, our law enforcement, our military officers, these are people that whether their skill sets are high or their skill sets are low, are folks that sit in the capacity to be the ones most likely to have to use force in very arduous conditions. And they need the best training they can get. And I know I can't provide training to everybody. I don't want to be everything to everybody. But I'd like to see instructors have a better understanding of human performance. I'd like to see instructors have a better understanding of the kinesics, a better understanding of physiology, and be able to teach people based on these tried and true ideas, and elevate themselves. Elevate the position of the instructor. I think that's where I'd like to start taking things.